tectonic plates perhaps shifting. Many people talking about that now since the BRICS summit has been happening in Russia this week. And to get into all of the things surrounding this, we are very honored to be joined here by Roger McKenzie, who is the international editor of the Morning Star newspaper, a longtime anti-racist organizer. And I say long time, even though he's still a very young man, and also an executive member of the Communist Party of Britain. Roger, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Everything was great apart from the young bit. That was
there's a lot to be said, I guess, about the BRICS summit. I mean, it's an interesting commentary maybe on the world. I mean, also happening this week is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. And I think two of the largest countries in the Commonwealth, South Africa and India, their presidents are actually in Russia at the BRICS summit. So in and of itself, I think, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, that would never be the case where we are now. So, I mean, I guess looking at this, Roger, I mean, how much, does this represent, a sea change in sort of geopolitics and global relations? And how much more is there left to be done, I guess, in that context as well? I think there's both the sort of positive element and the contradictions as well.
The thing with the Commonwealth heads thing, I get this vision in my head of all these colonialists sitting around a little round table, kind of carving up the world and stuff. And the problem is they probably think that they still are. That's the problem. And that they still have this kind of old mentality. But what we've seen this week in Kazan, I think is a really important moment in the world. I mean, we're kind of used to everything being instant and things happening real quick. I think we've got to get used to the idea that we're on a longer term project here. So I think a lot of people say, no, we're going to see, kind of real decisions made that are going to de-dollarize and all this sort of stuff. Well, I think we're seeing real small steps being taken to consolidate BRICS, to bring in the right partners, to make sure that things are working properly, that the new members of BRICS feel welcomed and understand the way that the organization works around consensus and stuff. And I think that's all really, really important. We've also seen, incidentally, something really important over the last couple of days, and that we've seen Saudi Arabia finally confirm that they're not a member of BRICS, and that it looks as though they're still going to take some part. And we have to imagine or kind of educatedly guess, I suppose, that the United States put some kind of pressure on the Saudis not to be a part of BRICS. But nevertheless, what we've seen is a whole bunch of new partner countries coming in. Really importantly for me, Cuba as one of those new partners. We've also seen Vietnam. We've seen a whole range of different African countries. So Uganda, which provides a link, across East Africa, along with Ethiopia, and with Ethiopia already being a member. We've got North Africa, so you've already got Egypt as a member, and now you've got as a partner, you've got Algeria. So we're seeing some big moves here, but I think that it's the right move that the existing members of BRICS are consolidating, are making sure that the direction that they need to go is the right one, that it looks as though they're going to, that they're extending the term of office of Delma Russo as the chair of the BRICS Bank, if you like. And I think that's really important as well, to provide some continuity there. So I think what we've got from this week is a really big moment in terms of where the global majority is at. The fact that we've got massive, ancient civilizations, Persian civilization through Iran, we've got Russian civilization, we've got the Egyptian civilization, we've got Indian civilization, we've got all of these civilizations coming together, that I think is going to make a real difference. And, we've got the West, the former colonial powers, who can only just sit and watch as this takes place, and there's nothing they can do about it. the genie's out of the bottle, and these changes are going to bring about real changes in the world, I think.
Roger, no, we've definitely covered the rise of BRICS and the sort of like growing multipolarity that we're seeing the world move towards on this show many times. But I think a lot of people probably have questions like what I'm about to ask you, which is okay, this is all happening within the context of a very different world than last year, because since last year, we've had you on to talk about this before. There's been the genocide in Gaza, which has now expanded to Lebanon, which could expand to Iran as Israel tries to escalate. The US and Israel try to escalate with Iran and potentially go to war there. Yemen is being bombed. Sometimes Iraq is bombed. And it just seems like the neocons in the US are fulfilling many of their wildest dreams at the moment. Imperialism, US-led imperialism, has never been more depraved or vicious than what we've witnessed for the past year. And it just feels like the rest of the world is either unable to do anything to throw a wrench in it or unwilling, whether it's fear of the US, whether it's because there's a lot of countries in the global south that are complicit with the US and are complicit with Israel, some of whom are in BRICS. And now new members of BRICS, right? So I guess the question becomes, how are we, and this is more like a devil's advocate question, but I guess I kind of feel it too these days, is how are we supposed to be encouraged by any sort of multipolarity that might come about in the distant future when we need something to get in the way of a Holocaust right now, and there doesn't seem to be any power there at all. Like the US seems to be more hegemonic than it has ever been. At least that's how it feels.
The power that I've seen in recent times that's brought about any shift in the politics in terms of the genocide around Gaza has been brought about by the people, not by governments, it seems to me. Some governments have kind of shifted. I think the point was made by your previous guest about how even kind of openly fascist Maloney has decided to stop arms going to the Israelis, but nobody else has. Other people have kind of yapped about it and done nothing. We've got really, lots of fine kind of speeches being made. You need to look at the UN a few weeks ago and some of the speeches that were being made, but nobody's doing anything. So that leads me to the conclusion, Rania, that we have to do what we've always done as a people, which is rely on each other and build the movements ourselves, build on what we've had in terms of the anti-war movements, but also something more than that. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking before I came on really was about, do we really want to just continue putting, we might have some politicians in the BRICS now who we've got some respect for and we think might do something eventually sometime, and that's all fine. They might do something. But I'm much more comfortable with putting my faith and my organizing kind of efforts in with people who are prepared to build movements, not just in their own countries, but across the globe. Now, you could just leave BRICS to develop over that longer term period, as I think it will, and hopefully develops in a proper way. Although I think there's going to be some real obstacles along the way when you look at some nations like India, who are part of this, and UAE and so on. I think there's some built-in obstacles already within there. But I think that what we have is an opportunity to build our own movement to put pressure on BRICS. And I think so. For me, we need to be looking at what more we can do to build that worldwide movement of progressive forces, for me, communist, socialist forces that are going to really push these politicians to do something. I mean, when I first started getting involved in politics, all those years ago, Eugene says I'm young, I wish, all those years ago was I was told that the only way politicians ever move is if there's heat under them to move, and I think we have to create that heat, not just in our own countries but across the globe. So I'm really interested in looking at what is it that we can do to build on the progressive movements that exist, not just within the BRICS nations and the kind of partner nations, but in like the belly of the beast as well. Like in the United States, in Britain, so politicians can't get away with nice, easy kind of comments that, yeah, of course we're against genocide, and then nothing happens. The only way anything will happen with those politicians is if we force it to happen. So I'm really interested in that sort of discussion about how we can build that movement to put pressure on these politicians. But actually, anyway, I think it's something that is absolutely necessary at this time. I'm not in favor of somebody else deciding my future. Actually, I'm much more in favor of sitting down with fellow activists and designing our future ourselves. So I think it's in our hands and not politicians who we can't reach and who are seemingly not prepared to listen, and certainly not to do anything about the genocide that's taking place at the moment.
No, I think those are all really important points, and point to the fact that it's kind of a two-way street in a way. I mean, if we want to see different things happen, to the extent there's movement from the global South, good, but let's not cut off our own knees here. Let's try to get some movement in the global North, so it's not just one group of people who are out there. Let me just ask you this quickly, a couple more minutes before we close, Roger. I mean, the significance in many ways of more African countries, not just joining BRICS. I mean, there's a lot of contradictions in Africa, but just being more at the center of the global conversation, whether we're talking about joining BRICS, what's happening in the Sahel, the South African ICJ case. I mean, what does it mean for the next, let's say, 20 years to have Africa, or what should it mean? What could it mean? What hopefully will it mean more at the center of the global conversation?
Well, funny you should ask that question, because my next book is going to be is about that very subject. Because for me, what we're seeing at the moment is I think the unstoppable rise of the African nations at the moment. But again, that won't just happen. Because there will be a kickback from the colonial powers. They're not just going to allow this stuff to take place and just say, well, tough, we've been beaten this time. That's just not the way they operate. We all know that. What they will do is there will be a reaction. And again, we have to be organized enough to be able to support those countries. But I do think that when you look at the Sahel, when you look at the way that certainly the BRICS as a bloc has recognized the importance of Africa at last, actually. So I was a bit kind of surprised that there weren't more African nations in the first tranche of new nations coming in, but now we're getting more. And when you look at the strategic nature of those groups, it's about creating trade corridors. It's about creating links for those countries. So it's not just a randomly done thing. But for me, this is about a great, there's like so many great African civilizations that many people in the global North, in the belly of the beast, where we both, we three are, who don't understand how all of those great civilizations have played a massive role in carrying things forward across the world. But also, as well, it's about the resources that those nations have as well, and having more control over the resources that Africa has, so it's not continue to be portrayed as a poor, struggling continent, but actually has more control over the resources. And frankly, I think your earlier guests made the point: without Africa, then the rest, the West is done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having those resources available to build Africa, I think, is vital. So I want to play a role in supporting that from where we are across the diaspora. And sometimes we just talk about Africa as being on the continent, and I'm involved in enough organizations as well that are looking to see how we can support what's taking place on the African continent, on Mother Africa, from places like Britain and the United States. And I think that's an exciting time, but it's going to be a difficult time because there will be a kickback. The United States isn't just going to allow that to happen.
Absolutely. Well, as always, very enlightening. Always enjoy talking to you. Roger McKenzie, international editor of the Morning Star, amongst many other superlatives. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks, guys. Take care.